There's a ton going on in the world. I haven't done an episode in a little bit of time. So, without further ado, let's get this show on the road. I'm your host, Skylar Budman, and welcome to The Rundown, the video podcast, something or another show that discusses all the things that I think are most pressing, coming to you on a basis that I decide. I've been trying to upload videos a little bit more frequently. I'm just getting back into the swing of things. I'm not any great editor, so all these videos tend to take me a substantial amount of time to produce. Content comes quickly, but production is rather slow because I'm an awful editor. But that hasn't stopped me. So let's get to some of the most pressing issues going on in today's world around you that you probably should know about. First and foremost, Facebook has changed its name. It's now going by the new name Meta, Meta, Meta. Now, you might ask yourself, why? Why is Facebook changing its name? Well, you probably heard that people found out that Facebook is a company that is dead set on earning profits. I know, shocking. Unlike the other companies, which are dead set on um, earning no profits, this company, Facebook, is set on earning profits. Why? It has stakeholders, and of course, those stakeholders are only going to be satisfied if there are profits. And by stakeholders, I don't just mean shareholders. That's why I said stakeholders. It means employees or other contractors who work with Facebook. They need Facebook to make money in order for Facebook to pay them. Facebook owns a bunch of subsidiaries, companies like Instagram, employs a lot of people. That isn't to say that Facebook is a good company, but Facebook has been under scrutiny because young girls are coming out and suggesting that the root of their mental illness is caused by social media, specifically Instagram. I believe Facebook is kind of the antiquated form of social media, so the preferred form among the youth is Instagram. Now, I heard a very interesting point, and I think that it's something that I should share. And this isn't to defend Facebook, it isn't to even get into a discussion really about Facebook and some of their more grievous or egregious acts. Of course, what Facebook does in way of censoring individuals and influencing basically political culture in this country. It's recently been reported that Facebook and its subsidiaries and Mark Zuckerberg were complicit in spending around $419 million in the last presidential election. I can't imagine that that money was only spent on one political party, but I digress. Uh, the thing about Facebook is if you are just now learning because of an investigation launched by Congress that spending copious amounts of time on social media, not interacting with people, and just scrolling on your phone um, is bad for children, or if you are under the impression that children who are reporting severe mental illness, including things like suicidal thoughts, are having these thoughts just as a result of Facebook, I'm here to tell you that's complete bogus. It doesn't even make any sense. I mean, we're talking about people who are talking about suicidal thoughts. This is a severe sign of mental illness, and we are meant to believe that the reason for these suicide thoughts is Facebook. So as to say that if Facebook didn't exist, these children would be completely mentally healthy. I mean, I think that sounds even absurd just to say out loud. Um, the idea that Facebook makes itself addictive, it's, I mean, that's basically what all these products set out to do in one way or another. The term addiction is associated with the illness of addiction, that being alcohol addiction, tobacco addiction, drug addiction, things that are directly linked to negative health ramifications. But is upgrading your iPhone every year considered an addiction? Is going out and purchasing the same food products on a weekly basis considered an addiction? Like coffee, is Starbucks considered an addiction? Of course, Starbucks wouldn't be nearly as successful as it was if people didn't feel like they needed their daily fix of coffee. Um, Facebook intends to do just what every other company intends to do. They try to make consumers who they can rely on to continue using their product. So obviously, Facebook's constantly in the news. It's being ridiculed for the wrong things, and the actual indiscretions committed by the company seem to be just widely overlooked, and not overlooked, of course, by people on certain sides of the political aisle. Of course, the right goes on and on about the issues with Facebook. The left goes on and on about issues with Facebook. These issues seem to be vastly different from the issues that the right puts out there. Of course, suggestions that the government will be able to solve these issues coming from either side of the aisle intended to achieve whatever end, I find both to be absolutely ludicrous, which that will enrage people on both sides because for whatever reason, the modern day Republican, and it's not really for whatever reason, of course, there is a reasoning to it, but I digress. So Facebook has changed its name to Meta. Now, Mark Zuckerberg talked about this today. I believe this is where I'm seeing all the reporting coming out today, that Meta is intended to encompass the company's new idea focusing on this concept called the metaverse. Now, if you follow tech news or news, maybe on a more in-depth level, perhaps you've already heard about this advent from Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg actually presented this with some news station a couple months back. I want to say it was something like Good Morning America, but I couldn't say for certain. But he showed a beta version of the metaverse. And what he showed in essence was something like a boardroom. And Zuckerberg is a animated character in the boardroom, and he had the host on the news show also with her own animated character, and they both wore this kind of goggle technology that you've probably seen before, and they had some handheld devices, and they interacted with each other, sitting next to each other in a pretend boardroom. And I thought this was exceedingly bizarre. Of course, technology is going in all sorts of ways, and basically people like Mark Zuckerberg, who are usually on the, or who, well, I guess he was on the cutting edge of technology with the advent of Facebook. He's looking for the next frontier. So in his mind, he's determined that this next frontier is going to be the metaverse. He envisions the metaverse to be the next big thing like the internet. He thinks that the metaverse is going to be a way for people to interact with each other almost like virtually in a video game. They'll be able to exercise within the game or within the verse. They'll be able to play video games within the metaverse, help people, he says, connect, find communities, and grow businesses. It basically sounds like the internet, except it's going to allow you to just be immersed in the internet. So instead of sitting in front of a screen and being able to look out your window, you'll have goggles on you that will just engulf you in the internet. So we've decided, of course, too much screen time is bad. People should get out and enjoy nature. Mark Zuckerberg is building something to allow people to never have to get out and enjoy nature. You could just exercise all through these tech devices. And, I don't know. There's a lot to say about this. First of all, it's kind of the people like Mark Zuckerberg, perhaps, who are suggesting that this is a good idea, uh, who are maybe more inclined to spend tons of time inside, not to peel away from their screen ever, and to be even more immersed in the internet. I think that the internet provides a lot of great things to society and to people. Uh, I think cell phones provide great things to society and great things to individuals. Of course, the internet is a wonderful invention and something that I don't imagine many of us could live without. For people who are my age or younger, we pretty much don't remember a time when the internet wasn't integral in our lives, and it's just become increasingly more of an element in our lives. It's become pretty much required. If you don't have a connection to the internet, you wouldn't even be able to go to school nowadays. So, of course, the internet is a part of our lives, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's very trendy to speak out and say, "Oh, of course, it'd be great if we didn't have the internet." But it's a ludicrous statement. I mean, nothing's wrong with the internet, but the problem that I see here is that we've gone from, and this is just in the past 18 months, people staying in their houses, fear of the outside world, uh, to people staying in their houses, and this was, short periods of time staying in their houses. We're going to do a little reset, whatever you want to call it. Stay in your houses. Then it was staying in our houses for extended periods of time, putting work online using platforms like Zoom, then putting school online. And when I say school, it's not just university, graduate degrees. We're also talking about elementary school, high school, uh, putting these regular functions that almost all of us, well, I would say, grew up with, going to school, meeting up with friends after school, interacting with people in between classes at school, having recess at school. And we took those things and we moved them online. And then we are acting like, I mean, it seems as though we're acting like nothing's really wrong with that. Oh, it's great. I mean, we don't have to cancel school anymore. We don't have to really ever be in person anymore. We can do things from remote locations. And yeah, of course, there are advantages to that. And I'm sure there's a whole bevy of advantages that people who are in favor of such um, changes to our society could list. But at the end of the day, the lack of human interaction is just being magnified. I don't see how anything positive is coming from that. And so my hope is that the metaverse doesn't take off. This doesn't become the new wave in terms of how we're going to interact with each other. It seems as though we're going to have factions of the society who will just relegate their lives to the virtual, and then factions who will not. I just can't imagine the ramifications are going to be positive. I think that what we see is that by allowing ourselves to remove ourselves from society, by allowing individuals to just take themselves out of society but still function within it, we're allowing people to take the problems that they have, and they're almost able to become hardened in those problems. An individual who struggles with social interactions, perhaps it's struggling with finding an intimate partner, or struggling with finding a uh, a mate, and not a sexual mate, but a friend. They're they're going to relegate themselves to this virtual life. They're never forced to address the problems that they have, but rather they can become more deeply ingrained in the aspects of their life that allow them to avoid their problems. It's as though we have this crutch, and we're just further enabling people to have this hindered development, where we're creating just half humans who aren't able to, they never have to come to terms with the problems that they have emotionally or physically, because they'll never have to leave the house. And perhaps I'm speaking too broadly about something so minor, but it just seems that as we're talking about this, You can work and you can play and you can learn, you can shop, you can create, all in the metaverse. And it sounds so great. I think we've seen what technology has done. Going forward, perhaps we should proceed with caution. We have seen all these technological advancements come so quickly. We're simultaneously talking about the negative effects of social media, which I think are certainly overstated, but existent nonetheless. And then we're hit with this new idea about the metaverse. I just hope this is met with the criticism that it deserves. It's certainly too early on to tell. Of course, it hasn't been released yet. I'm sure it'll be riddled with bugs and other problems. Of course, it'll create another community for crime and so on and so forth. But I'm just hesitant with something of this nature. Anyway, moving on. Representative Cori Bush, she spoke out just a little bit ago. This is just a flash headline that I saw come across my screen, where Cori Bush accused oil executives of environmental racism. Of course, you guessed it, another discussion about racism, and of course, I could dive into this. This was during a meeting of the House Oversight Committee's subcommittee on the environment. Of course, very important. And Cori Bush, Representative Bush, made some comments during this hearing where she asked the BP America CEO David Lawler if the majority of fossil fuel CEOs are black or white. Then she went on to talk about if an oil refinery is more likely to be in a black or white community. Then she asked the Chevron CEO Michael Wirth if the impacts of climate change were more likely to hit a black neighborhood or a white neighborhood first. The executives obviously didn't know the answer because, like most people, the executives are probably not fixated on race. But when your whole political candidacy is based on adding fodder to the racial fire that we've decided to just allow to grow to these rampant proportions in our society, you have to tie everything to race. She actually called fossil fuels. She said it was this is a striking example of white supremacy. Quote, "Your profit-driven choices threaten my life, the lives of my family, my neighbors, and our communities every single day." Bush continued by describing herself as, quote, "a black congresswoman with asthma." And this is reported by Fox News, and this was just a little bit ago, like maybe 15 minutes, 25 minutes ago, by John Brown of Fox News. And of course, we could get into the details again of something like this, and we could speak about how absurd it is to attribute environmental problems, to call the environmental problems targeted. I don't even know if we could actually get into that because it's so absurd on its face. Of course, the environment doesn't exist in set locations. As a matter of fact, what we are being led to believe, and this is just what we're being led to believe, whether you decide to believe it or not, is up to you. But what we're being led to believe is that climate change is a big problem because it will affect us all. This statement by Cori Bush is taking the issue of climate change, taking environmentalism, making it about race. Of course, everything has to be made about race. And I thought about this, and I thought this probably really should be addressed in a more intelligent way, because of course, when you're talking about racial issues, when you're talking about specifically issues with the black community, you're talking about 13% of the American population. But of that 13% of the American population, and I mean, we can talk about white supremacy. I guess that's talking about more of the population. But white supremacy is kind of this, it's an overused term. It's like racism. It's come to almost mean nothing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the episode. But when you look at these comments about racism, you always see it's a very consistent message. It's always the us versus them. You're talking about blacks versus whites. You want to pay mind to the fact that these attacks by Cori Bush, they're intended to segment the population. So then you think, well, it's 13% of the population, so why would you want to segment just 13% of the population off into a group? How is that going to bolster Cori Bush's base? Well, it's a good question. You also have a portion of the rest of the community. Outside of this 13%, you have people of all different racial backgrounds, all different demographics in general, who are so paranoid about receiving this label of racist, which has come to mean absolutely nothing in this day and age. Of course, you could imagine that an oil refinery is placed in an area where one is able to establish an oil refinery. I mean, you can obviously assume that when the CEO of a company is deciding, when Exxon is deciding or BP is deciding where should we put this oil refinery, I would be willing to bet any amount of money that part of that discussion has nothing to do with, are there more black people near this area? Will we be able to cause damage to more black people? If that discussion is happening, I mean, I would love evidence of that, and then I'd stand, next to Cori Bush and say that is racist. If a CEO is sitting down saying, how could we affect the most black people? That's racist. But what Cori Bush is likely talking about is the fact that an oil refinery gets placed in an area, and either because of the oil refinery being there or because the oil refinery is able to be there, the property value in the surrounding area is probably lower. Probably talking about an industrial area. And then when you look at people in this industrial area, people who are living in the residential part that's near an industrial area, you would imagine that the income level is lower. And then immediately, politicians jump to making this a racial issue, which is to suggest that by being of a certain race, you're more likely, or you are going to be a poor person. It might be the case that you're more likely to be impoverished, but then we don't ask any questions beyond that. And that to me has to be just a testament to how stupid these politicians think you are. Because it's either that Cori Bush is so daft that she's been led to believe that the only problem in our society is the color of your skin, or it's that she thinks her listeners, her constituents, are so dumb that they'll believe the only problems in society are attributed to your skin color. And that's just something that I think it's a perfect segue into another discussion that I just wanted to kind of leave the episode talking about. And I know that I've carried on for some time now, and I just wanted to leave with this discussion because this whole idea of the us versus them, and it's solely attributed to race, or it's even partially attributed to race, as if to suggest that the ability for a person in a minority group to become successful is non-existent. I mean, if you look at, for example, the average income of somebody, let's say, with a bachelor's or a higher degree, the highest earning category, $69,000. This comes from the National Center for Educational Statistics out of 2016. Highest earners are making $69,000 a year. Those people are Asians. Asians are the highest earners when they have bachelor's or higher degrees. But so why is it that we don't break down statistics in terms of who has a college education? Then of that group that has a college education, what was their degree? And then of that group, how many of those people fall into whatever demographic racial demographic or I don't know, socioeconomic background. Why is it that nobody is drawing this conclusion that the statistics are intended to be deliberately misleading? In a population where the majority is Caucasian, of course you're going to have people uh, who are Caucasian on the high end and on the low end of, say, earners in the country. They comprise the majority. So statistically speaking, it's likely that you'll have people who are very wealthy, you'll have people who are middle class, and you'll have people who are very poor, and you'll have all these people in between. That's going to obviously skew the data. So why is it that the data is not being presented in an honest way? Why is it that we're not looking at, okay, well, how many people in the United States are graduating from college? And then from there we say, of those people who are graduating from college, let's divide them up based on their degree. Was it an arts degree? Was it a science degree? Then from the arts degree, the science degree, then we decide what other subcategory we want to break it into. And then we determine from there what discrepancy actually exists. And the answer to the question is that if you were to actually isolate the variables, it's very unlikely that you would see a disparity simply on the basis of race. It would be bizarre, even if you could. But a science experiment, or any experiment for that matter, which doesn't aim to isolate the variables and instead categorizes people extraordinarily broadly, is intended to be misleading because statistically speaking, there are vast opportunities to mislead people with statistics that are dishonestly compiled and intended purposefully to be misleading. So just find it bizarre. And with the World Series going on, I saw this interesting article about the dehumanizing and racist claims that native leaders have decried regarding the Braves tomahawk chop. So ahead of the World Series, well, the Atlanta Braves are in the World Series. That's probably the first part of information that you need to know. And the Braves name is obviously a name about a Native American tribe, and they do a tomahawk chop. This is their some motion that they do, and it's I don't know, I don't know what you would even call it, the gesture that all the fans do, the tomahawk chop. Apparently, somebody is claiming that this is offensive. They're claiming it's offensive, and we saw this with the Washington Redskins, the Washington the Washington bad words, and now the Braves. The Braves are the next one, calling a team the Braves. Now, of course, we have to overlook the fact that an owner wouldn't name a sports team after something that they detested, because the idea behind a sports team is that the sports team is gritty and powerful and determined and they're winners. So this testament to Native Americans by naming sports teams after the Native Americans, it's not intended to be disparaging of their culture or whatever. Of course, none of that matters. And the reason that I bring this up, and the reason that I brought up this other idea about the environmentalism and the racism environmentalism, you need to pay attention to this new trend that we're seeing. And I'm writing something on this, and I'm going to put a link to my Medium page. I have some articles up there, and I'm going to put this up in the next few weeks here. But what we're seeing is, and this was just brought to my attention recently, but what we're seeing is postmodernism. This is postmodernism, and we are living in a culture consumed by this, and it's not really an ideology. It's a philosophy, is what it is, actually. And I just have this brief summary from Britannica. It says postmodernism is a late 20th century movement characterized by broad skepticism, subjectivism, or relativism. It's a general suspicion of reason. So that sentence there, a general suspicion of reason. That's almost what we are experiencing right now. When you look and see things that don't make sense, but then you see broad swaths of individuals who are coming out in support of those things, what you're seeing is a general suspicion of reason manifesting itself into these amorphous movements that are consuming ideas and just rolling with them, growing them as they mutate into these bizarre forms of themselves that no longer even resemble the initial kernel of the thought. And so we could take this with anything, but let's just take this with the Atlanta Braves just briefly. And I know I already touched on it, but think about it in this light. The Atlanta Braves, somebody went out, they created a baseball team, they named them the Braves, the Atlanta Braves. And it's supposed to be about something about Native Americans. I didn't look into it. Frankly, I don't even care. Something about Native Americans. Now, sports teams use names intended to bolster who they are. Why? Why would they do that? Well, they're competing against other sports teams. They want to build a brand, and they want a collective name to embody the group. Of course, nowadays we've come so far. I don't know how old the Major League Baseball is. I'm sure it's I don't know. Let's see. The Major League Baseball was founded in, I don't know. It's the oldest professional sports league. I don't know when it was founded. 152 years old, founded in 1869. Okay, it's very old. When Major League Baseball, when these teams started coming around, you can only imagine that people wanted to give their teams names that they thought would garner them some sort of respect and also would drum up interest from fan bases. Perhaps not initially, but they stuck with the names. There's branding surrounding the names. As you now know, baseball, professional sports, these are multi-million, billion-dollar industries. They're probably billion-dollar industries. So why would you name a team after the Braves? Well, you're intending to maybe you're not even intending to pay homage to the Native Americans. That's not what the sports team is about. But you're intending to bolster yourselves. You wouldn't give your name something like the Losers. You wouldn't name yourself something that's intended to make a mockery of who you are. You wouldn't pick a name that of someone you despised. You wouldn't call yourself the Nazis. You wouldn't pick something that's intended to be offensive either to you or to the group. It's like you have a football team known as the Bears. That's not meant to mock bears. It's meant to portray the aspects of a bear that you would want to be embodied by your football team that would garner support and exhibit aspects of grit. I mean, it's so obvious. So then all of a sudden, the usage of a term becomes racist. So then, and it's difficult to follow, and I hope you're still following, but then you have to take, okay, it's racist to name a sports team after something, and you have to connect those two things. And this all comes back to this general rejection of reason. It's a general suspicion of reason. Well, does it make sense? No, it certainly doesn't make sense. To be racist is to have hatred towards or express favor towards certain groups on the basis of race. I mean, if anything, this is expressing favor towards the Native Americans because of their race. Obviously, all Native Americans don't embody bravery and courage and grit and power, and neither does any one racial group. We all know this to be true. Nobody thinks otherwise, but we have to make a cause out of this. We basically have to take all the things that make sense, and we have to just get rid of them. And we see this going on with so many other things in our society where We're just taking reason and we're doing away with it because people are trending towards the emotional. How does it make you feel? Well, could we make this feel like it's wrong? Yes? Okay? Then it must be wrong. And that's what we're doing. We're taking a feeling, a conclusion, and from that conclusion, we are forming outrage and arguments. And the conclusion doesn't even have to make any sense. You can say anything you want. Climate change is racist. Okay. And then how are we going to piece it together? Well, we're going to say that refineries are more likely to be near neighborhoods that are predominantly black. That's racist. Really? That's racist. Um, anyway, postmodernism. I think it's very important that we talk about it, very important that you understand it, because you could look at many things in our society today and you could say to yourself, oh, that doesn't exactly make any sense. Why is there outrage? Why are we rejecting things that we thought were true? Why are we replacing the ideas that we accepted with notions of ideas that are not only unexplainable, but also not logical, in accepting them? Postmodernism. Anyway, with that, I want to wish you a happy Halloween. Have a good rest of your weekend, and I'll catch you next time on The Rundown.